Hi, friends. It's Mr. Rogers, and we're going to be going over proteins today. And I hope that carbohydrates and lipids have been going well. And proteins are probably one of the more important things that we talk about. I mean, they're all important, let's be honest. I shouldn't say they're important, but proteins are what the end goal of every cell is. A cell's job is to make proteins. And so you use carbohydrates as energy. You use lipids mostly for energy storage. You use that energy to make proteins. That's why you're getting that energy. And you have nucleic acids, which is tomorrow's. Nucleic acids like DNA, they're the code of life. But what DNA really is it's a cookbook to make these proteins. So everything kind of goes towards proteins. Proteins are super, super important. And because they're super important and super broad, it's kind of hard to talk about them. And sometimes students struggle with them. So please try to stay up with this and make sure if you have any questions, you let me know. We're going to go through the PowerPoint first, and then we are going to come back to writing notes on our cheat sheet, or our note sheet, I should say. So right off the bat, you could say I put specifics in two different spots here because there's really not examples. I could sit there and list like 10 million examples of proteins. So first, right off the bat, proteins contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, just like carbohydrates and lipids, but they also have nitrogen. And this is a dead giveaway. Whenever I look at something and it has a nitrogen, I think to myself, well, this is most likely a protein. And usually I'm correct. Not always, but usually. So protein being there, usually you're going to see a nitrogen. You're always going to see nitrogen proteins. Proteins are made up of monomers, just kind of like carbohydrates are made up of glucose as a monomer. Proteins are made up of a monomer called amino acids, and there's 20 different amino acids, and they kind of act almost like the alphabet of making proteins. Kind of like you have an alphabet to make words and sentences and paragraphs and books and everything like that. These amino acids, there's 20 of them, and how you put them together make billions of different things. Kind of like those 26 letters in the alphabet, there's a bunch of different ways you can put them together, and you can create crazy amounts of words, sentences, paragraphs, and books. Same thing. That's how I picture proteins. Proteins, when we talk about them AP Bio, we use that analogy a lot because proteins are small. We can look at them as a microscopic kind of view as just looking at the first couple letters in a book, or you can look at a paragraph, which is a bigger structure of protein, or you could be looking at a giant structure of protein, which is like a whole entire book. And so 20 different amino acids, they're all unique. They all have different things. We're going to add something to our notes when we write it down, but every single amino acid has a different R group. R in biology is a lot like X in math class, okay? X in math class is a variable. It's something that can change. Same thing with R in biology. When I say it has an R group, every amino acid is going to have a different structure on the side of it, and we call that an R group. Each one is different. So proteins have a lot of jobs. It's not easy to just like nail it down to like these few things. So the first thing is proteins are used as enzymes. I explained enzymes because that might be a new word for some of you guys. Enzymes break down things. Okay. Enzymes are the things that not only break down things, I should also say they help build things. Enzymes help things happen faster in your cells. So last week we talked about hydrolysis and dehydration synthesis. There are protein enzymes that help speed up those processes. They come over and they help put two things together, or they help break a thing down. So enzymes are super important. And we're going to do a lot of work on enzymes in the coming weeks. Okay. Transport. We're going to use proteins to help move things in our bodies and in our cells. We help build our cells and our bodies with structural jobs of proteins. Your immune system is exclusively built by proteins, and it uses proteins as a way to protect you. Storage. We use proteins to store different materials. Really, almost everything in the cell is made up of proteins because, like I said, carbohydrates is energy. Lipids is energy storage, and a couple other side jobs that we talked about. Protein is basically everything else. Everything else in the cell is made of proteins and it's ran by proteins. And so proteins are super important. Now, one of the more famous proteins in our body is this guy right here. So this is what a protein actually looks like. And you can kind of see this is called a ribbon model. And this is a very macroscopic look of a protein. I'm just going to be honest. When I say macroscopic, it's zoomed out. If I zoom way in, then I'll be able to see all the amino acids. This is probably about, I think, if I remember right, hemoglobin is about 1.1 million amino acids connected together. So this is a lot of amino acids, and they have to be put together the right way. And when they're put together the right way, this guy here holds oxygen. His job is to be a trap for oxygen. And so he grabs oxygen for your lungs, takes it where it needs to be, and drops it off. So a red blood cell is supposed to look like this. In anatomy class, I always tell them red blood cells are supposed to look like a beanbag chair that someone just got out of. They look like somebody just sat in them and stood up. Sometimes errors happen in proteins, small errors. And one of the more famous one is sickle cell anemia, which is just one tiny mistake. One tiny amino acid is wrong in the whole thing, and you get red blood cells that look like this. And they can't grab oxygen very well. They struggle to cage oxygen. Oxygen can get out very easily. And the other big issue is these guys get caught up on everything. People that have sickle cell anemia, the full sickle cell anemia trait, they don't live very long. They only live 10 to 15 years. People that have partial sickle cell anemia, they can live now with drugs and a couple other things to 50, 60, 65 years old. So they can almost reach max life capacity. But this is a problem. This is a huge thing. And it's just with one tiny mistake. And that sometimes blows my mind. One mistake out of millions of amino acids, and that person might not be able to live. And so we always got to, we're very fortunate. Sometimes we have math says that there should be more mistakes than there actually are. So that's it, really. Next one is nucleic acids. So let's actually go through and add this to our notes, what exactly I want us to have. And so let me pull up the sphere here. And so we got proteins. So proteins contain carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. All right. We'll say their monomer is amino acid. Okay, cool. Let's keep going with this. Let's add more. I think you guys are quite smart group, and so I want to make sure that I'm giving you a well-rounded education here. I'm not just speeding through this. And so if I was to actually look at an amino acid, there are 20 amino acids. They all have something called an amino group. That's connected to something called a carboxylic acid. So you can kind of see where they get their name, amino acid. And they're connected to a R. This R makes an amino acid unique. So every single amino acid has an amino group. Every single amino acid has a carboxylic acid. Every single amino acid has an R group, but each R group is different for each one. And so if I have a R group that could be different things, to be honest with you, like some R groups are polar. Let me write some R groups. Are polar. Some R groups are non-polar. Some are neutral, meaning they have no charge. Some have a charge. Each one is unique. Each one is different. Each one does a different thing. And so if I have an amino acid that's polar and I put it next to another polar amino acid, they kind of hug against each other because they're best friends. Polar likes polar. But if I put a polar amino acid next to a non-polar amino acid, they push away from each other and they fight and they bend. They bend the protein. And so how these R groups interact really make proteins special. And that kind of gives us to what proteins are for jobs. We'll just start off from the very beginning. They do almost everything in the cell. They almost do every single thing in the cell. That's basically their job. I could write all of them again. Like we can write enzymes and, defense and all these things. But at the end of the day, like they do almost every single little thing in the cell. And I'm even kind of cutting them short by not adding even more jobs here. Okay. They do almost everything. So if it's not for energy and it's not nucleic acids passing on a trait to somebody else, it's a protein doing something in your cell. Okay. Now, things that I want to make sure that we're recognizing here is every single one so far in lipids and carbohydrates, we brought up the fact that if they're polar or non-polar, we made a big deal out of it. This guy I have not, because proteins can be polar or non-polar. Okay. They can be either or. And so I can't tell you what they're going to be. It kind of depends on what their amino acid structure is. Based on what kind of amino acids or words they put together into their protein sentences, I can't tell you if they're polar or non-polar. So you have to recognize that sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Okay. So let's go through everything. Protein has carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. The monomer is amino acid. There's 20 different amino acids. Every amino acid has the same structure up top here. They have an amino group. Side note, that's where the nitrogen is, if you wanted to know. Carboxylic acid over here, which is a bunch of carbons and oxygens. And then every amino group has a different R. Everyone has a different R. And that's like an X in algebra. Okay? It's a variable. It can change. And so we put a different R group there. Every single R group makes an amino acid unique. No amino acid has the same R group. Some R groups make an amino acid polar. They make them non-polar. They can make them neutral. They can make them have a charge. They can make them acidic. They can make them basic. Plenty of things, but every single amino acid is slightly different. And then the jobs that proteins do, they almost do everything in the cell. They do enzymes, defense, storage, transport, structure. Basically, if it has nothing to do with energy or passing on traits, proteins are doing it. And so I hope this kind of makes sense. Proteins are a big, big group. And unlike the other ones, we don't go into a lot of details about each individual job they do because they do so much. And I could spend the rest of the school year going through all the proteins that exist in the human body. And we can't do that because we have to do other things. So I hope this made sense. If you need help, let me know and I can help you. Thanks, guys.